everyone. This is another episode of Golda's Girls, and my co-host for today is Rachel, and our special guest, we are very honored to have him, is Dan Pollak. And Rachel, will you explain a little bit more about the bio?
Daniel Pollak is the Director of Government Relations for the Zionist Organization of America, ZOA, and he directs operations at the Washington, D.C. office of the ZOA. He's been with the ZOA, the oldest pro-Israel organization in the U.S. since 2007. In his position, he helps educate members of Congress, their staffs, and other government officials on the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, as well as on policy issues relating to the Middle East. Mr. Pollak worked previously as a submarine officer in the U.S. Navy and then pursued a 25-year career in the information technology industry. He has an MS in computer science from NJIT, and a BS in mathematics and statistics from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Before joining ZOA, Mr. Pollak was an IT executive for the Bank of America. Highlights of his career with ZOA include the fight against the appointment of Chaz Freeman as the chairman of the National Intelligence Council early in the Obama administration, the continuing struggle to prevent Iran from achieving a military nuclear capability, and the effort to get decision makers to understand that the Palestinian Authority has not lived up to any of its commitments in the many agreements it has signed with Israel. In the course of his work for ZOA, Mr. Pollak has written numerous opinion pieces for publications, several articles, and has debated representatives of organizations with other viewpoints. He's appeared on Al Jazeera in Arabic and in English programs for Russian and Iranian TV. He is a member of the Jewish War Veterans. His hobbies include reading history and science fiction, computer programming, and being a fan of baseball and football. He lives with his wife in Silver Springs, Maryland. So nice to see you again, Dan. Welcome.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Yeah.
Nice
I want to start by asking you first, what is ZOA and is it connected to the Israeli government in any way?
So we are a 501c3, a nonprofit charity, and we are the Zionist Organization of America. We represent American Jews and have no formal ties at all to the Israeli government. I am a registered lobbyist, but not a foreign lobbyist. I'm an American citizen, and I do things on behalf of the Jewish American population, not any foreign government.
Wow, that's very clear. It's funny that a lot of people with the conspiracy theories think totally different things. Yeah, so my question will be, when it comes to Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, millions of Arabs live there. Should they become Israeli? And in addition to that, I find it very hard that is still up for discussion, because so many times there was the opportunity to get their own place there. And Arafat walked away when even 97% of Judea and Samaria was offered. And still people attack us, Jews and Israel, that we don't take care of them. And of course, the situation is very difficult now, but what is your opinion about that?
Well, first of all, as I said in the first question, I'm an American. So the ultimate answer to that question has to be answered by Israelis through their political process.
Yeah.
And therefore, all of us in America have to have a certain amount of humility in answering the question, what should be the ultimate resolution of such things? The real answer is the people who send their children to the army, the Israelis, have to decide what they're comfortable with. But we have opinions as part of the Jewish people. The important thing for us is that Israel continues to be the homeland for the Jewish people. There are multiple ways that the people in each of those places, in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and in Israel proper, can have full civil rights with or without Israeli citizenship. For the people in pre-67 Israel, they do have full civil rights, as you know, I'm sure. Many people serve in the Israeli judiciary, some in the army. They're not required to serve in the army, but some do. When you go to a hospital in Israel, I'm told you were recently there, if you go to a hospital, you'll see Arab doctors and nurses.
Yeah, large
It's
quantity.
a very integrated country.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Jerusalem, it's something that we believe is Israeli sovereign territory. The Arabs of Jerusalem proper have been offered Israeli citizenship. The vast majority of them chose not to accept it and to accept an Israeli identity card that gives them the right to live in Jerusalem, but they have chosen, for political reasons of their own, not to associate themselves with the Jewish state. That may be a model for something that could happen in Judea and Samaria. My organization does advocate that eventually, that Judea and Samaria is the biblical land of Israel.
Yeah.
We believe that that is something that belongs to the Jewish people. And so we're in favor of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria eventually, at a time that the Israeli people find it to be effective to push for that. But that doesn't mean that every single person who lives in the territory should or can become an Israeli citizen. The ones who are loyal to an enemy entity clearly cannot become Israeli citizens. So it's kind of a common sense answer. To those Arabs who aspire to Israeli citizenship, it's a country that guarantees full equal rights to every citizen, regardless of their religion, and Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or no religion at all.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way that it should be approached. But we don't seek to dictate to Israel when and how they resolve that question. I hope that answers the question.
I like so much that you say that, because personally it irritates me often that a lot of people have opinions and I have that my entire life. When I lived in the Netherlands, they had also solutions. They knew better, and I said, you know what? If you know better, go to Israel and go to tell them, and don't speak here. It is so weird that only happens with Israel. You don't hear
As Zionists, we believe in aliyah. If someone wants to make their views known to the Israeli government, the best way is to immigrate,
absolutely
make
the
aliyah,
same thing,
and then vote for the party of your choice, even if it's the party I don't like.
Yeah.
Now, that's
I like that opinion very much, and I also hear some humbleness, if that's the right word, because yes, that's what I always say. They risk their lives, they do it all. Who are we to have a comment about that? You know, it's like so off the whatever. It's something I don't like at all. Yeah, thank you for the answer.
Dan, can you please explain what you do in Washington, D.C.?
Sure. I spend most of my time meeting with either congressmen and senators themselves or their staffs, and frankly, educating them. There's a wide variety of knowledge, even amongst members of Congress, about the matters that we're concerned about. Unlike other organizations, ZOA only has positions on issues relating to foreign policy in the Middle East, Iran, Israel, Egypt, and so on, and anti-Semitism. We don't have a position on gun control. We don't have a position on abortion, all the other things that American Jewish groups seem to prioritize over the things that really ought to be what American Jewish groups are all about. So we really focus on those. And so I meet with them. I have an office on Capitol Hill near the Senate, and I go and have meetings more often with members of staff. Many people don't appreciate that the vast majority of members of Congress have so many issues they need to know about that they really rely on their staff members to establish positions. And so these people are usually very smart, if I can call them that, because a lot of them are from Ivy League schools. So they were smart before they went to the Ivy League school.
Yeah.
Whether they retain their smartness through that education process is a good question.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're very quick. They've read a lot. And a lot of times they're indoctrinated from what they've learned at school. And so we have to educate or uneducate them on the things they've learned that are wrong. And we do our best at that. And then we try to influence them to properly prioritize the legislation that we are advocating for. And just for as an example, this week, the House is strongly considering a bill that may become law on Wednesday, or may be passed by the House on Wednesday, to punish the International Criminal Court people on the staff who are advocating to indict Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. And they're also threatening to, in the future, indict Americans for so-called war crimes. And this bill would make it against American law to do so, and would punish them in various ways, including disallowing them and their families to visit the United States. This is something that the president could do on his own, but this week, the House is going to pass that bill. So most of my time until this meeting has been spent trying to get more Democrats to agree to co-sponsor the bill and to ultimately vote for it. It looks like it's going to be very popular with the Republicans in the House, and we're hoping that 20 to 30 Democrats will also vote for the legislation. So that's an example. But I spend my time actually in meetings with staff people. Some of them I've known for years, and some of them I meet for the first time when I have the meeting with them.
Yeah, wow. Okay, then thank you. The following question is almost a weird question for me, because I think it shouldn't be like that if it is like that. But the question is ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America, a right-wing organization, or even pro-Republican, which I think, please, no, that's ridiculous.
We're definitely nonpartisan. We're required to be. If we wanted to be a partisan organization, we would have to operate under different laws. So anything we do politically, we don't endorse candidates. Many people describe us in the media as a right-wing organization, but my boss, Mort Klein, who you should have on the show if you haven't already, he's a...
Oh, we will.
He's fabulous.
Have you had it?
Not yet.
No,
he just started. He just started then. You're very
not on the show, but I was at the ZOA gala event, not this past year, but the year before, the last 2 years. And that's where I met Carla, actually. Mark Levin was the speaker, the guest speaker, and Kevin McCarthy was also there. And Mort Klein is just an incredible person, and his speeches are amazing.
They are. And
wonderful.
So much more than I can give you, because he's got a certain delivery presence. But one of his quotes is, when it comes to Israel, there isn't a right and a left.
Exactly.
There's right and wrong.
Yeah.
And we're on the right side of that.
Yeah.
So people can describe us however they'd like. We believe that our positions are rationalist centrist. We think there are people to our right and to our left, but on the American political spectrum, most people seem to believe we're on the right, which is their own view. But no, I seek to have just as many friends on the Democratic side of the aisle as on the Republican side. We appeal to both sides. As I said, the work I'm doing today is to reach out to Democratic offices to have them convinced that many Democrats have already signed a letter expressing their frustration at the ICC's, International Criminal Court's, actions, and we just want to translate that into action. Now, the complication is the president has already announced that he's against it. So it's very difficult in an election year to get Democrats to go against their president, but if it's a matter of principle, that they should be willing to do so, and that's what we're pushing for.
Dan, are you saying that President Biden is against the bill, or against?
He's against the legislation. So he has, in fairness to him, he has condemned the ICC's actions, but he thinks that, back in 4 years ago, President Trump, in response to a threat from the ICC to indict an American for war crimes in Afghanistan, he placed the prosecutor, just for that investigation, on a list of people who cannot come to the United States. And then one of the first things that President Biden did when he took office was to rescind that executive order.
Yeah.
And President Biden has repeated the idea that he thinks that that's too drastic an action, and he wants to resolve the ICC's indictment through other diplomatic means. But in fairness, those of us in ZOA are thinking that something more strong needs to be done, and we do strongly support this bill. But it's probably going to pass the House this week, but it may never be taken up by the Senate because the Democrats control the Senate, and it's actually personally up to Senator Schumer, who is, of course, a loyal foot soldier in concert with the president, and he's unlikely to bring it up for a vote if the president opposes it.
Yeah.
But we keep on pressing.
Well, that's great that you do that, because I find that very sad. And so many things that are said at the ICC are sort of like based on nonsense and on false information, misinformation. It's just terrible. And
it's worse than that now, because they actually do know better. They've had investigators come to Israel.
yeah,
In order for the ICC to indict, it's supposed to be based on a crime having been committed. It's really three things. A war crime has to be committed, which probably hasn't occurred in this case, oh, by the way. There has to be jurisdiction. In this case, Israel is not a signatory to the treaty that implemented the ICC. So even if Israel had committed a war crime, they don't have jurisdiction over them. The fiction they're using is that the Palestinian Authority signed the treaty, and therefore the country of Palestine, which is a fictional entity that does not exist,
exactly.
is giving them jurisdiction. And the third thing they're supposed to have is there's a doctrine in international law that you don't address something through international law if the national judicial system is capable of investigating it and finding against it. And Israel has a very robust judicial system. If an Israeli would commit a war crime, they would investigate it and they would punish the person.
Yeah.
And in fact, they have.
And they do. And
Not
they
even
do.
war crimes, but crimes done by a soldier in the course of a war. And there is no reason to believe that they wouldn't proceed that way. So the indictment of Prime Minister Netanyahu is wrong on 3 counts, just to reiterate. They didn't do the crime. There actually is not a purposeful starvation campaign in Gaza, you both know. Number 2, they have no jurisdiction because Israel didn't sign the treaty and Palestine is not a country. And third, Israel would have a way to investigate and solve this. In fact, on the very day they announced the pushing for the indictment, they canceled the trip by 2 of their investigators to fly to Israel. Israel didn't keep them out. They canceled the trip on their own. And of course, they twinned the indictments of these Israelis with an indictment of Hamas, which is one of the most disgusting things you can do.
That's unbelievable.
Yes, that upset me very, very much. I find it so disgusting.
You can't put that on equal footing at all.
Yeah. No, it's like totally loose. Well, in the beginning of the question, to me, it's like personally ridiculous. I mean, being Jewish, and then for 2,000 years, we have that sentence next year in Jerusalem, right? Zionism is, if you don't want to speak from a religious point of view, it is the wish of the Jewish people to go back to the place they are indigenous to. And most of the land is bought, and most of the additional land is obtained by being attacked and by accident win. That's how I look at it, because it's like miraculous how they win wars. If you start a war, you can lose, so don't start a war. And then when I went for the first time to a meeting of ZOA in Boca Raton, I was expecting to see many people I knew, but they were not there. And I realized a lot of Jews think about it differently. And they think, oh, it's right, so I'm not going. And I find it ridiculous that we have such a division. And I find it's
this
terrible.
Is related to the question you asked about whether we're right-wing. The perception amongst some people who are very pro-Israel is that we are too extreme or too strident. And I told this to Rochelle when I was speaking at the bagel shop.
Mm-hmm.
We tell the truth. That's what we're famous for.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't like to hear the truth.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is there's a lot of anti-Semitism. There's a lot of very muddled thinking about what is right and wrong in the Middle East. And we're the one group who won't pull our punches, even when it would be easier to do so. And that's what we do. And that's what makes some people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And there are some Jewish organizations that are going to look back at this period and not be proud of what they said and did. And we're not going to be that way. And you can look back at the Holocaust. In America, we have a lot to answer for that in our history. I told you one of my hobbies is reading history. A lot of Americans don't face up to the fact that we, the American Jewish community, purposely kept ourselves ignorant of what was really going on in Europe and didn't do enough. There was an effort to go to President Roosevelt and ask him to do more to save the Jews of Europe, both before the war and after. And we didn't do enough in America.
Yeah.
And the ZOA now doesn't want anyone to say that we are not doing everything we can to contribute to Israel's survival.
I read a while ago that even worse, that the New York Times in that time had a Jewish publisher, how do you say that, an owner, and he was so doing his best to be like neutral that he barely published anything about what was going on in Europe. And I think in 1944 on page 7, he was mentioning something about concentration camps. And so one time mentioning, and I think, well, many Jews read the New York Times, or at least read the New York Times. That is a typically thing that we speak about also in other sessions that we have. How terrible that is that you sow your best to belong. You're such a good American that you really commit a crime on the other end because you don't stand up for your brothers and sisters. And
that is, in my view, that's what never again means.
Yes.
That's what Am Yisrael Chai means. We're not going to be silent, and we're really going to make a difference if we can, and we're going to.
Yeah, I so agree with you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And the $64 million question, Dan, is President Biden pro-Israel?
Well, if you would ask President Biden, he would say
yes.
He'd say yes.
He thinks he's very pro-Israel. He does have a history of supporting Israel, as many, the history of the Democratic Party is one of supporting Israel all through the 60s and 70s. And he was there in Congress starting in 1972 in the Senate. And he has many pro-Israel things that he's done in his career. But we should remember some of the exceptions. It's famous that in a hearing with Prime Minister Begin, yes, you've seen the report.
The famous meeting.
Exactly. He was asking him. He was threatening him back in those days with cutting off aid to Israel if they didn't stop the settlement policy that was the dogma of both Republicans and Democrats in those days. And the answer from Prime Minister, why don't you tell us, Rochelle, what Prime Minister Begin said?
Was that the time that Begin said something about not kneeling?
That's right. We are not Jews on trembling knees.
Right. We only kneel before God, not.
That's right. And basically the answer was, you can decide whether to cut off aid to us. That's your choice. We're going to fight. And that's what we need Israel to say today, in almost exactly the same way. President Biden, unfortunately, has been all over the place. He's trying to please everyone.
Right.
Some people say that he's in favor of the two-state solution, meaning Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Right. That's probably
if you look carefully. My boss has pointed out correctly that the election concerns don't adequately explain his anti-Israel steps and policies because, first of all, they're not helpful. The opinion polls in Michigan, yes, there's Arabs that live in Michigan, but the vast majority of the people of Michigan are actually pro-Israel. And his steps to appease the enemies of Israel are not popular in those critical states. So as a political thing, doesn't make much sense. But even worse, some of his anti-Israel steps, for example, support for Iran and giving them money, predate his election policy. So it's very hard to explain it, except he's trying to have it every way. He's trying to be popular with the Jewish Democratic base, and therefore he says pro-Israel things sometimes. He's also trying to be popular with the worst anti-Semites in the Democratic Party. And that's, from our point of view, his era. You can't do that. You can't appease and say that Ilhan Omar is a very brave person, or Rashid Tlaib, the Democratic congresswoman from Dearborn, Michigan. You can't say that she's got chutzpah, which is what he said. It's just an offensive thing to use our word to describe anti-Semitism as chutzpah. So we have very mixed feelings about him. Of course, we're nonpartisan. It's not our job to designate who is an anti-Semite and who isn't. We are against many of the policies of this administration. If you go to the ZOA website, we have an entire page about all the anti-Israel people that have been appointed to this administration. And each one of them could be the topic of a separate interview, but the bottom line is they need to do better at standing up for America, which is, after all, their job. And our ally, America, is Israel's. So every time they do something that's anti-Israel, it requires more explanation than they've given, in our view.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I don't even think this is about DEI, but there are so many Muslims and like definitely openly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel people in his administration. And I can't remember the name of the man that's in intelligence. He's
AMR.
Yes. And to me, it just boggles the mind that this is who is in the administration. That this is the kind of person that is so obviously anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. How, you know, and in such a sensitive and important position.
That's not even the worst case. The worst case is there's a woman who's the chief of staff in the Pentagon to the head of anti-terrorism for the Department of Defense. And we have an email from her. She's born in Iran, which, as Carla can attest to, doesn't mean you can't be a good American. Become naturalized. Sure. But she's born in Iran, and she wrote an email to the head of Iranian intelligence saying, "You know, my first loyalty is to Iran." And this isn't in a letter. And she wrote in Farsi, the language of...
Can't deny it.
And she doesn't even deny it. It's something that we have. She hasn't lost her security clearance. She's still working in the Department of Defense. It is absolutely inexplicable. I don't have an explanation even for why she should be at least under investigation and have a temporary loss of her security clearance, but she's not. And this is, elections have consequences. The people who are in our government, there is a little bit of DEI in there, but more than, they don't want to discriminate against Muslims, which is correct, just for being Muslims.
Yeah.
But if a person is a political activist who says they're loyal to the government of Iran, that's something that we can't ignore, it seems to me.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Ilhan Omar has done the same thing. And she spoke Arabic.
She said that she works every day for Somalia. In Congress.
Amazing.
Her, and that's the first she tells it in Somalian. Yeah. You know, that loyalty, that's always interesting. And as Jews, if you don't live in Israel, we are loyal to the country we live in. I mean, for sure. And, but you don't have to do it in that way. And it's not correct to say that if you're in a public situation, profession like that. So,
go ahead. I just want to make a comment there.
More, please.
She's just, it's one thing. I mean, Tlaib, when she took the oath of office, had the Palestinian Arab flag wrapped around her shoulder. And I have no problem with a Muslim being a member of Congress. I have no problem with everyone expressing their full political rights. What I have a problem with is the anti-Semitism that she has gotten away with, and that other members of Congress, I mean, when a person is a bigot against African Americans, everyone in Congress criticizes them. We actually had a Republican member that was eventually taken off of all their committees and eventually didn't run for re-election, from Iowa, Steve King. And ZOA used to be a friend of his, and we criticized him when he teamed up with a white supremacist person, even though he agreed with us on all the issues relating to Israel. And when the equivalent things happens with these anti-Semites in Congress, instead of actually having a resolution expressing our revulsion at their anti-Semitism, we actually ended up with a resolution condemning all forms of hatred, including Islamophobia, which is just really inappropriate. And we see the same pattern on our college campuses. Instead of actually robustly condemning what is clearly anti-Semitic activity, you have to put in a balancing phrase about anti-Arab discrimination and Islamophobia.
Yeah.
It's just not the same problem. And pretending it is doesn't change that fact.
Yeah. I noticed that there was like a 7-page, I think Nancy Pelosi came with that, like 7 pages, while it was simply anti-Semitism and nothing else. But that shows in itself a lot.
It does.
And then when Biden had Kamala Harris head up this Islamophobia thing, I thought that was hilarious. I mean, it was so ridiculous because what was happening on the hugest scale was anti-Semitism, not Islamophobia. You know,
Exactly.
and the timing of it was so outrageous.
There was a great joke following 9/11 by a comedian who said, "Thank God the terrorists didn't use an atomic bomb on New York City, because then we'd really have a problem with Islamophobia." The joke being that all the people were concerned about the reaction to the terrorists instead of what the terrorists were doing themselves.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. Well, I see from your bio that you served as a U.S. naval officer. Is there any conflict between your allegiance to America and advocacy for Israel? And we spoke about it a little bit already, but how is that for you?
Yeah, I'm very patriotic. I served 4 years on a submarine, and I think America is just, the idea of America is the greatest idea in the world for a country. But I'm a member of the Jewish people. I haven't chosen to make my home in Israel, but I am a Zionist and I want Israel to be strong. Thank God I've really never seen a conflict between what's best for America and what's best for Israel. But it's not, in theory, such a conflict could arise. And I make no bones about it. I'm an American. I'm loyal to our country, 100%. But I don't think there's any conflict between advocating for Israel. And in fact, it's just the opposite way. When you see the protests on the campuses, they burn American flags and they show other flags. When you have a counter demonstration, and you can see behind me, I have American flags and Israeli flags. Yeah. And at every pro-Israel event I've ever seen, there are people carrying American flags in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, even the combination flag. That is one flag with,
yes.
Yeah.
I've seen it, but I don't have that because I'm old-fashioned. In the Navy, you don't, there's rules about what you do with a flag, and it actually is a technical violation of the rule. So I wouldn't have a flag like that because half an American flag is not really appropriate for an American flag.
I get it. Yeah.
But following 9/11, just let me say, in Israel, it was the one country in the world that had really the same reaction that we had in America. Whereas in the Arab countries, and particularly in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, they literally celebrated.
Partied, yeah.
And there are videos that are disgusting.
Yeah.
And I one time posted on one of the anniversaries of 9/11, the video of people celebrating in an Arab town the death of Americans. And someone wrote back to me, "How can you do this? This is a day for remembering our dead from the terrorist attack." And I said, "That's exactly what I'm doing." I'm remembering them and remembering who our friends are and who our enemies are.
That's so unbelievable. I was in the Netherlands still then, and we had in several cities, the big cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, there were Muslims dancing in the streets, burning the American flag and the Israeli flag when they were burning it. It's like same thing. And then
I'm sure they burned the Dutch flag too, right?
No. Then they didn't. No. Then they didn't. But then I come to America and talk about it, and people don't like that I say that. You know, it's not that I make an additional problem. I just mention some facts. And I've spoken with those Muslims. I had quite some Muslim friends in the Netherlands. Well, why would you burn the flag in a country that you get hospitality from? Why would you be? So that is a weird loyalty, because there were Muslims in the Netherlands burning the flags of America, burning the flags of Israel. So the loyalty is very clear where they are loyal to.
Let me say, I've met Dutch people when I've traveled. First of all, I'm very impressed with your education system. They often speak English better than I do.
I don't think so.
But
weird accent.
Well, you're fine. Anyway, the bottom line is the non-Muslim members of Holland, especially the ones who are older, they really remember what America did to rescue the country from the Nazis.
Yes.
And I guess that value hasn't been transmitted to the new immigrants all the time.
No, not at all. It's even worse, because we had very good Holocaust education, because 90% of the Dutch Jews have been murdered. And in the big cities, The Hague, where the ICC is, right, and Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and Utrecht was also, for like 35 years, they don't dare to teach about Holocaust out of fear of upheaval, which the Muslim young people create in school classes. So they didn't teach. It's like a lot of young people today don't want. There's a tiredness to hear about the Holocaust to begin with. But then now we have Israel, the issue, so it's all melted together. But they are very aggressive. Not all of them, of course not. But there is a very aggressive big mouth. It's like, come on, that's our history, because Holland was occupied 5 years, and that meant a lot of Dutch people suffered tremendously too. And no, that is totally taken away. I noticed that when we had like 4th of May, there's a memorial service everywhere. It's like 1 or 2 minutes of silence. Well, you do that out of respect, right? No, I saw several neighbors. They were screaming. They were like making a lot of noise to disrupt that. So yeah, we have.
There's an interesting take on that, which is, I've debated people from the opposite point of view on various channels. And one of the things they say is that, why should Muslims suffer for what European Christians did to the Jews during the Holocaust? So their story is they were innocent victims, and the European Christians did it out of guilt. But of course, the establishment of Israel has nothing to do with the Holocaust. People were fighting for it long before that. Our entire case is not. Many American Christians misunderstand that when we speak about the Holocaust, we're somehow using it as a justification for Israel's existence. No, it's back 3,000 years, 4,000 years that our history goes, and that's the reason why we have Zionism, not because of what happened in the 20th century.
And then that little crazy situation that Israel is so tiny, smaller than, what is it, New Jersey? And the Arabic countries, they have so much land. Couldn't we be a bit nicer and give the Jews a little bit their own space and Gamardo Sheka, right? Why can't we be a bit more human? And that whole question is never asked.
The answer to that, again, you have to study Islam a little bit, which I bet you two ladies have.
I did.
And when you start to understand in Islam, they have a theological idea that any place that's ever been controlled by the Muslim body politique can never revert to non-Muslim control. And that it applies to Spain just as much as it does to Israel. And they are, if you ask a believing Muslim, they think that eventually they will control Israel, but they also say they'll eventually control Spain and the whole world.
Yeah, because that's part of the Waqf, right? And if they sell, or they sell their home, or they would sell the space, even if it has been conquered just by war, they are object to being punished by death penalty, because they are not good Muslims. So that problem, nobody speaks about that. Thank you for bringing that up, because most people don't know about that. And
it's particularly ironic that Spain just recognized the Palestinian Authority.
Two-state solution. That they don't want. They don't want the two states. They want it all or nothing until they get it. Yeah. Wow, this is incredible.
Okay, Dan, you've said that the ZOA is opposed to establishing a Palestinian state. So what is the solution to the Arab wars against Israel? I don't know if there really is a solution, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
And one of the things that bothers some people about Americans around the world, I guess, is that we go around the world always thinking we're going to come up with the right solution to everything. And sometimes you just don't have a cookie cutter answer. And I think that applies to Gaza now and ultimately to what happens in the region. The real answer over time is what happened with the UAE and is happening with Saudi Arabia. The people of those countries have come to the conclusion, not because they love Jews any more than they used to in the previous generation, that their own best interests do not align with continuing to be at war forever with this country. And in fact, they have a greater threat from Iran, and Israel can actually be an ally of theirs. Again, Israel shouldn't overdo it and trust them or believe them for good that they're going to be great friends forever. They have an alignment of interests. And the same thing happened with Sadat. They have a very cold peace, but he came to see that the progress of the Egyptian people was not consistent with staying at war with Israel. Someday, God willing, this will also happen with the Palestinian Arabs. But we can't rush it.
No.
And they are still teaching their children at an early age to hate us.
Yeah,
if we would allow Gaza immigrants to come to the United States, we would essentially be letting in people who have been indoctrinated their whole lives to hate Jews. It would be so crazy to do
Well,
that.
actually, Justin Trudeau is calling for 5,000 Palestinian refugees in Canada. My friends in Toronto, which is where I'm from originally, are absolutely furious and petrified because he's just completely destroyed the country.
Yeah, I've read about that. But yes, Canada is a great example and also a cautionary tale for us. When we allow immigrants under asylum, we don't give them a questionnaire about who they hate. And the answer in this case is they hate Jews. We've already admitted a lot of people from Syria who were brought up under their education system where they're taught from an early age to hate Jews. And it's some of these people leading these demonstrations on our college campuses are the very refugees that we admitted from Syria.
Oh, yeah.
And it's there's more to be said about the Gaza refugees. You know, millions of Ukrainians have left the country in order to escape what is a horrific situation for them. But in Gaza, the world has conspired against humanitarian law to keep them in Gaza.
Yeah.
They, even though I'm opposed to admitting those people to Toronto, getting some people out of Gaza makes a certain amount of humanitarian sense. There's a lot of Arab countries that have plenty of places to
They don't want to take one of them.
They don't want to take any. And they so far have not. The only exceptions have been people who are able to afford very large bribes to the Egyptian border guards.
Yeah.
And people that are related to the Hamas royal families, they are able to get out. But the regular people are not. As a humanitarian thing, they should be in Egypt. They should be in
Jordan,
India, in UAE, even in Jordan. They should be all in the countries around them in order to prevent the inevitable loss of life that occurs when you're in a war zone. And it's a sad commentary on the entire world that they hold Israel responsible while doing nothing to alleviate the actual suffering of those people.
I think, too, that if they were spread in those countries, they will not give up fighting Israel because honor is a very big value in the Islamic way of thinking. And that is a good reason to create another war.
Let me give you a counterexample, though. That's true. But a counterexample there is following the 67 war, you didn't hear much because they have a theological problem with defeat.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that they say they'll never surrender, though, is the rest of the world is giving them moral support.
Yes.
And it's resulting in the elongation of the war, not just this one, but the larger war between the Arabs and the Jews. And it's resulting in their hope that they can still force Israel to make surrender concessions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's one of the unintended consequences of President Biden's policies as well.
Yes. Yes. Side effects that are detrimental in a way. Yeah. Well, that brings us to our weekly thing we always do is sharing information about what is our anti-Semite of the week or something like that. And then we go to the hero. So would you like to start, Rochelle, and share it with us?
Sure. As I said earlier, before we started this taping, there's so many anti-Semites, and it's so hard to choose. But what I decided to do was to choose the three countries, Spain, Ireland, and Norway, because they're recognizing a Palestinian state. And in so doing, I feel that they're calling for the genocide of Jews. So I think it's disgusting and horrible, and I think more will follow.
Yeah.
Yes, just this week, Slovakia has said they're going to do it too.
Yeah. And it's so a product of the Western way of thinking. They do not understand another way of thinking. I often compare it like the criminal mind recognizes the innocent mind and knows to manipulate that. But the innocent mind does not recognize the criminal mind and cannot handle that. And I find that typically an example from how they do this, because it sounds like sharing is caring, right? In America, the solution, or European, whatever it is, it's the solution. You have a problem, you want the same space, share it, everybody have their space, get married, have fun, and go live, right? Stop doing the war. But they just don't want the whole piece. Like you said, they don't want peace, but they want the whole piece. That's just the effect to it. And that seems not to, people think in Europe, many people think, okay, if they have their own state, they will shut up. But they won't. They won't. And I hope that it won't be Gaza, because I think if we keep Gaza as is, we will have this problem over and over again, because there is no different education. I heard it already 20 years ago in the Netherlands that people were talking about, how is it possible that we pay for the school books where anti-Semitism is taught? How can European money go there? Well, it went on and on and on. And there's the desire to deny.
I just wanted to make a comment first. It's so sad that this is a part of your program, that we all know that there's going to be plenty of anti-Semites to go with a weekly program. It really is when, I guess we can define when things have gotten better, when we don't have such a feature or nobody can think of someone to add. It's so sad. Mine is going to be, because I focus on Congress, we already mentioned her, Ilhan Omar. She's a member of Congress. I'm sure you're all familiar with her. It's nothing new, but that's who I think of. And it's a constant battle, because the people who know better in Congress cannot bring themselves to actually be frank about what she is and what she's saying. And she has said and continues to say nearly every week something that is anti-Semitic. And she keeps on doing it. Then she apologizes for it. People say she didn't really mean it, but she did mean it. And it's past time that she should be seriously disciplined, not token discipline like she's experienced so far. And ultimately, she needs to be defeated. Unfortunately, she won her primary again. So she looks like, she's going to be in Congress again. And she's a terrible example.
Yeah. Thank you.
Nobody could get away with saying some African-American things or Muslim things. If anybody in Congress was talking about Blacks or Muslims the way that she talks about Israel and Jews, they'd never get away with it.
And there would be no coming back from it, even with an apology. And the example is this guy, Congressman Steve King from Iowa, who was essentially removed from the Republican Party and Congress after making statements that were pretty stupid. And white supremacists. Yeah. So we have an example. We know for sure. We know what happens when you cross other lines. And it's just a complete double standard when she speaks.
Yeah, and that is so weird, because one of my best friends in the Netherlands was also from Somalia. And she told me how the way, and like Ayaan Hirsi Ali does too, how the way of thinking in Somalia is. It's like a common habit to, if something goes wrong, to blame the Jews, the Yahud. So it is a whole brainwashing education, call it education, to blame the Jews if something goes wrong. Even if there is no Jew nearby, it's the Jew, the Jew, the Jew. That's her blueprint. So then, of course, if you want to be in politics and you want to remain where you are, you go to apologize like she did about the Benjamins then. But that's pure nonsense because it doesn't come from the heart. She's not believing it. She has that pure hate. And that's what I learned from my Somalian friends. That is the way they were raised. I became friends with them and said, "You are the first nice Jew we meet. And how many Jews did you meet so far?" "Well, barely." But then I come in America. Do you think that people want to hear those stories? No, because it's like, oh, that's nasty. But that you need to understand there is a different way of thinking. And you have that in the government. And that is not in alignment with the American values, I would say.
Agree.
Well, I have another one. I have one too, and that is Professor Avi Shlaim. He is originally Israeli, and he's born out of Iraqi parents. And I was very shocked to hear him speak a few days ago. He speaks as a very nice personality, calm, friendly, but he comes with utterly nonsense. Sorry to say, you can look it up on YouTube because it's still there. In an interview, and I am first of all, why do you need to speak out? Because again, you're not in the war, you're not losing your kids in the battle, you're outside you live in England, he speaks perfectly British. Why do you need to have to say something? But he does, because he's Israeli, so he gets interviewed everywhere. And then his theory is like, Jews had a good time living in Arabic countries. In Iraq, there was no problem for the Jews. And I'm like, what? Do you know about the Farhuk and other things? And he goes on and on. My parents, they never spoke about discrimination. He fails to say that so many Iraqi Jews had to flee for their lives after 1948. And this kind of people make me so extremely mad because they create more problems. They do not help the situation. They create more hate. And you see the Jews, they had a great in Arabic country because he says it. And it's like, he's of course a big friend of Ilan Pappy, I think that's his name. And he's also a
historian, yes.
Yeah, historian. And it's like, like Finkelstein, same stuff. So that is my guy for this week. And I find it very saddening. You used in the beginning the word sad about how some Jews behave. And I find this terrible. I just say, shut up, do your thing and stay out of it. Or when you live in Israel, you can speak.
My heroine is a Syrian-born Lebanese woman named Rawan Osman. She's a commentator who's now based in Germany, and she became an outspoken advocate for Israel and the Jewish people. And she has an active social media presence, and she's the founder of Arabs Ask. She uses her native Arab language to share the truth about Israel to audiences who rarely have the opportunity to get that perspective. And I think that's so important because so many Arabs in these Muslim countries really don't have information about Israel that isn't tainted and biased and negative and hateful. So I think she's amazing and I appreciate her.
I love people like her because it is so important and courageous, like Qasim Hafiz and Luai and the son of Hamas, etc. They are so courageous because they risk their lives speaking out in the way they do. So maybe we put the name underneath and then people can follow and support her account. It will be wonderful. Okay, Dan, I hope you have a hero too today.
I do. He's been a longtime hero of mine. But he wrote another piece just this week, Natan Sharansky.
Oh,
yeah, he's amazing.
And the piece he wrote this week was about the students at Columbia, not the ones that we see demonstrating, but 500 Jewish students at Columbia signed an open letter, which you guys should read if you haven't, expressing their, reclaiming their Jewish identity in the face of all these things, that it would be easier to just stay quiet, but they are proud Jews. They are supportive of Israel. They're Zionists, and they spoke up. And he said that unfortunately, he said that much of what's happening in America reminds him of his days in the Soviet Union, when everybody knew that what the things that you couldn't say, but everybody knew that they were false, but nobody would speak up because it would ruin your career, it would ruin your life.
Yeah.
And he said they had a theory amongst the refuseniks that if 10% of the people would actually start speaking up, that would cause the failure of the entire system of lies. And eventually that happened in Russia. And he says he thinks the beginnings of this could be amongst the Jews at Columbia, where people are speaking up and saying that the conventional wisdom about wokeism is not okay with them. And that if that can inspire other people to say the same thing, and ultimately, both at the Ivy League schools and in our schools across the country, there's still hope. I'm a little more pessimistic, but he's
Me
still
too.
here.
So am I.
Me too, but
It's
still,
a nice step,
it's
but,
great that they are courageous and standing up, but at least they did something. Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, my hero or heroines are just, as an entity, as a group, is the IDF. Those boys, I was in Israel last week. We have visited them in the Shiva, I would say hotel, but the hospital, right? And so I had so many beautiful encounters and conversations. And you see those young boys with chopped off leg, chopped off arms, or in a wheelchair, totally out of it because they have such a head wound that they lost their regular way of thinking. And I have so much respect for them, the willingness, the courage, and the suffering they go through. Not only them, but also their families, their parents, their wives, girlfriends, or boyfriends, of course, girls too. So I find them like beyond courageous. So all my respect.
You're absolutely right. Let me just say there was some concern amongst some conservative thinkers who had visited Israel about whether this next generation in Israel was going to live up to the previous generations. And, they have the same thing.
Yeah.
But it turns out that all of our fears were misplaced. These people, I'm sure you both know, but the airplanes back to Israel after October 7th were completely filled with Israelis who were in America or elsewhere in the world and wanted to get back to their units so they could be called up for reserve duty.
Yeah.
And there is no doubt that the young generation in Israel has exceeded our expectations, and we have a great deal to look forward to with them.
Yeah.
The jury's still out on the equivalent young generation in the United States. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not left in our hands, I would say. But that I so agree with you, and it's very powerful, and I hope it will stay like that. Absolutely. Well, thank you so very much, Dan. It was very insightful and interesting to talk to you.
I want to thank you, ladies, especially Rochelle, for thinking of having me as a guest. I hope I've made some friends here. I'd love to see you guys the next time I'm in Florida or wherever you are.
Absolutely.
And,
we will.
And also, in Israel, we'll see each other.
Yeah, we stay in touch. That's awesome. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Dan, great to see you.